So, hello, my name is Magda. I'm the CEO of Cocharia, and I'll be moderating bits of this session with David Tinker, who's joining us from the UK, as you can see from his houseboat, where apparently there's baby goslings hanging around. So what a wonderful place to be. David is the co-founder of ProReal, a virtual reality coaching software, which itself is based on David's training in sociodrama, storytelling, and coaching. David has had a career in the military, flying helicopters. So pretty interesting life, I would say. And that has led him to work as a consultant with blue chip organizations around the world. He seems to travel quite a bit. In the week that I've known David, he's been in Poland and now in the UK. Seems to be everywhere. As I said, he lives on a boat, he plays the tuba, and he teaches paddleboarding on the weekends. What a fascinating guy. David, do you want to give us a bit of an overview of what we'll cover today and jump right in?
Thanks, Magda, and welcome to my boat. And if you see some geese and goslings sort of walking past the door, I apologize for the distraction now. I thought I'd introduce myself through my digital life. And as Magda said, I used to fly helicopters for the military in the past. And it was really important when we were learning to fly that before we could use digital sort of navigation, we knew how to use a map. And the theory behind that is that the digital aid could always malfunction, but the map couldn't. When I left the military, I ended up on the telephones on a kind of national helpline for people who were, some of them potentially suicidal. And one of the evenings when I was on duty, somebody turned up with this computer and put it on the desk. And we said, what on earth's that for? And they said, well, we're going to start using email. And we thought, well, that can't possibly work. We're spending our time on the telephone with people. And it ended up one of the most successful and effective ways of running the helpline. It was a few years ago, I was walking along a street. I had nowhere particular to be at any particular time. And it was drizzling slightly, and I had a Mac on, and I noticed I reached down for my device. I had no need for my device. I didn't have a call to make, but I pocket for my device, and my supervision group they thought it was a bit like a child reaching up for the parent's hand. I've been coaching using remote work and virtual worlds for the last 3 years. And I also provide supervision for a coaching and mentoring masters, and all that's done online. And as you can see, one of the joys of being digital is being able to talk to you from my boat. So what I'm going to do today is share some of the thinking around digital coaching and describe some of the science behind the use of avatars and virtual worlds, and some of the learning and the potential impact on the role of us as coaches. For the presentation, we'll look at how clients' worlds are changing and the impact of digital on their learning processes. We'll then explore how that might influence and change our roles as being a coach. And then we're going to do a live demonstration. Technology permitting, we'll do a live demonstration of a virtual world tool. And then after that, we'll do questions. So we'll move on to a little bit of audience participation next. So we'd like you to respond to a few questions of a poll. So Magda, if you could set it up with the first question on the poll. The first question is, what's your age? We'd like some idea of average ages. So if you can remember what your age is, you don't need to kid anybody. So put us down as accurate as you can around your age. And then during the day, how many times do you think you check your device? And the third question is, how digital is your coaching practice?
Sorry to interrupt for a second, David. To those of you who haven't realized it, the poll is on your screen. I know a few of you just listen and not necessarily all the time look, so.
Okay.
Okay, I see answers coming in.
Great. So the third question there is, how digital is your coaching practice? And that kind of ranges from, it's an essential part of your coaching, you do a lot of it at the moment, but actually on the other end is you don't do very much at all. So find somewhere in that range in question 3. And question 4 is, what are your thoughts and feelings about coaching remotely? See if you can, which of those words best describes how you feel about working remotely? And question 5 there, what's the most common presenting issue or objective with your coaching clients? So having just listened to David, my colleague David Clutterbuck's comments, quite often these objectives change. But what's your presenting issue or objective that your coaches come up with, the most common one? So rattle through those, and then Magda, if you let me know how many have responded, we need a good percentage.
Got about half, and I see them still coming in, so let's give it another couple seconds.
Give it a little bit longer.
Okay, we're at 70%.
Still going up?
Yep, I think I'm going to finish in about 5, 4, 3, 2. All right, ending poll and sharing.
Okay, so our main age is somewhere between 40 and 60, aren't we? We're somewhere between the majority of people here. So slightly older group, a couple in the 20s. You check your devices between 20 and 40. The average, just so as you know, is around 85. Most people are unaware that it's 85 times a day devices get checked, and they're kind of in disbelief about that. But the average is around 85, and some research is now showing, certainly for young people, it can be more than that. And so it looks like in the audience here around how digital your coaching practice is, it looks like you're starting to do some digital work, with some already having it as an essential part of the coaching, and others just starting out. And you're seeing it as, it's quite interesting. So working remotely with clients and working digitally, you're seeing it as necessary. So I'm quite, hopefully as a result of this, you'll come away a little bit more excited and maybe a little less anxious for some. And around the most common objective for coaching is leadership skills. So hopefully when we do our demo later on in this session, the live demo, that's something we can look at. Okay, I'll go to share screen. So the world of our clients is changing. Digital is having a big impact on the way they're learning. Quite a few of us are ending up in Facebook groups to learn specific subjects, or LinkedIn groups. We can attend free lectures. Some of the best lectures from around the world are available freely, and we can look up something really quickly. So the way in which we're learning, we can learn by communities or groups, or we can learn by accessing lectures, and there's so many other different ways of learning nowadays. There's an awful lot of apps now available online, and you might find some of the coaches you're working with asking you about various apps, and which might you recommend. And certainly for some people who are buying coaching, they're looking at whether they provide apps or an iBot, or do they engage with what can be seen as now an expensive coach. So apps are being seen as a cheaper way to distribute learning and development. What we're noticing is much more text-based interaction. I think a good gauge here is an SMS counseling service in the US that's been amazingly successful. And this is where people feel more prepared to talk through texting something on their device rather than turning up and talking to someone or even getting on the phone. And I noticed the other day when I was engaging in making some travel, I was being pushed into responding through synchronous chat. So we're making less phone calls and sending less emails. Only 35% of people still prefer to use email, and that's mainly of millennials. And 53% of employees use instant messaging with co-workers. So there's been quite a sharp increase in the use of text. And certainly for me, I have two sons who think it's ridiculous that they might call someone when they send a text in their mid-20s. Another consideration here for this group is about identity online. Identity is starting to be is to be digital for some people. They're Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. And a sense of that's where they belong, and that's what they represent to the world and how they see themselves. It's noticeable that some people are becoming addicted to some of their digital activity. I was with a group not so long ago where one lady talked about going cold turkey and switching her device off for a day. So it's quite noticeable that for some, the device or being connected digitally can be a stimulation of some kind. It can be a comfort. It can be a sense of belonging. It can become a habit, a number of things around working digitally. So far as corporates are concerned, one of the things that we're noticing for a number of organizations that provide coaching or a learning and development solution, they're being asked by corporates to have a digital element in the offer or in the intervention, so as that helps reduce costs, but also increases employee engagement, particularly for a younger workforce. Something we're also noticing is remote working has increased by 33% in the last 3 years. So there's a lot of people working in their pajamas, probably not with the videos on like this. Savings for the organizations in travel and office space. And some are asking, are employees as productive? There's also a challenge for some employers around employee engagement. And how do teams get connected when they don't see each other and they're working remotely and they don't even come to the office? I think there may also be another impact here on work-home life, where for some it's difficult to keep boundaries, whereas they used to get a train to go home, or they transition from work to home. Work can be in the same place as home. If you're thinking about coaching remotely, this next slide is about what I call some basic considerations. Data security is a must, certainly for those in Europe. GDPR and taking care of where you store your data, and encryption of the software is really essential. And I know in some parts of the world there's various restrictions or legislation around crossing state or country boundaries. Use good headphones. Good headphones, preferably with cans on and a microphone. This promotes intimacy. It means we don't have to raise our voice. If you don't have these, people start talking loudly into the computer like this, so we end up a little bit like trying to share an intimate conversation in a club with loud music, which really doesn't help for intimacy. So if there's one thing I'd like you to take away from today, invest in a good set of earphones. Check your background. I was on a call earlier on today, and this will make some of my colleagues smile as well. There was someone in his bedroom on a very serious call, and he was in the corner of his bedroom and had his video on, and just in the corner appeared what I can only assume is his wife, kind of creeping out of the bedroom and quietly closing the door. A wonderful distraction, but probably not what we want to have happen when we're coaching. So watch out for the distractions of family life potentially happening behind us. Some of the deeper connections here, and I'm going to refer to some wonderful work by John Suler. First of all, dissociative anonymity and visibility. The anonymity or sort of almost hiding behind the computer and not meeting someone face to face can enable some people to feel more confident. It's a little bit like wearing a mask of some kind. I don't have to be fully present myself, Now, some of this, as you can imagine, has positive and negative aspects. Certainly, we've seen online abuse happening where people have been far too open, but in our coaching and well-contracted world, that should only have a positive outcome and not a negative outcome. Minimization of status and authority. Coachees can be intimidated by us. They can be intimidated by our age, and we're clearly an older group compared with some you may be coaching. They can be intimidated by our gender, by our status of being a coach, or by our self-confidence, or even by what we wear. So there's something lovely about the potential of not being able to meet with someone face to face. And this can, for some, overcome stigma. And it certainly levels out some of the power difference that I know David was talking about earlier between the coach and the coachee. Disinhibition. This is, we have much quicker disclosure as a result of the anonymity and the invisibility. And we have research now that talks about getting to the important stuff really quickly. So we can get through the early stages of exploring narrative, etc., and get to the client's core work that they want to do quite quickly. Again, sort of considerations for us as coaches here is that we make sure that we contract really carefully to make sure that these coaching sessions with high levels of disinhibition are held well. Solipsistic introjection, which just a lovely mouthful of best described by John as Spock doing what's called a mind meld. For any of you that, like me, might have enjoyed Star Trek in the past. This is where we can we get lost in the world that's online and we meld with it. It's part of what we immerse ourselves in that. And we find that when using virtual worlds that this can happen with the coach as well. So we feel really understood. So one of the benefits for this for the coachee is that they feel strong sense of empathy. They feel like they've been heard and understood. And this alone is a powerful intervention, having the sense, because we've had this mind meld, this deep connection. John also talks about asynchronicity. So a lot of our coaching at the moment is probably synchronous. So in other words, we are talking and listening at the same time. But what digital presents for us is an opportunity to work asynchronously. So when we work synchronously, there's very little opportunity for the coachee to reflect and go, well, I'll just think about that for a couple of minutes, unless they're particularly happy to sit there with silence. So we can work asynchronously and there can be a gap in the communications. So these are some of the deeper considerations when thinking about coaching using virtual worlds or using digital solutions. So some of the role considerations. What we used to do, or maybe what we do now, is we meet in a place and we meet at a certain time, and that might be quite ritualized and that might be really well understood. We go to a certain office or someone comes to us. We meet in a dialogue. In other words, there's two of us and we work synchronously, as I described in the previous slide. And we're dependent on a verbal communication, and we hear storytelling verbally, and quite often we take notes. We can engage the client with additional literature, maybe theories or models, if that helps in their learning style, the way they're learning. And if we happen to be coaching a team, we probably meet with the team in a hotel room, and we'll travel there and maybe we meet there for half a day, or we go to the client's office and meet in a conference room. So this might be kind of what we used to do, and then digital came around and things have changed slightly. So it means we can engage anywhere and we can be there for when the client needs us. I've stolen the word trialogue here from Pennycock Tompkins and James Lawley. I've got a wonderful book called Metaphors in Mind. And if you haven't looked at clean language in your coaching practice, I really encourage you to have a look at that. And the trialogue is where we don't have just the two of us, ourselves and the coachee. The coachee is engaged with their metaphor or their story. And in some ways, we step back slightly. We can work synchronously and asynchronously. So if we think about using WhatsApp or instant messaging or SMS, there's another way, or email, there's another way in which we can communicate with our clients that becomes asynchronous as well as the synchronous. We've got access to visual, text, and verbal communication. So the storytelling can be done using a visual immersive representation, and you're going to see a little bit of that in a moment. When sending over notes, we've got opportunities to use films, sound bites, screen grabs. So this whole world of learning and meeting your clients' learning styles and learning preferences then becomes much more available online. And online work with teams using virtual worlds means that the requirement of everybody to meet in one space at the same time, that we can move on from that and meet virtually. Okay, we're going to do a fishbowl. Fishbowl, for those of you who haven't done a fishbowl, seen a fishbowl before, is where you're going to see a bit of live coaching happening. So they're the kind of the fish in the fishbowl, and we're going to be outside the fishbowl watching that happen. And what we're going to do in a moment is we're going to join a session, and they're going to be using some software we've been using for a few years now, and software that's working particularly well. And we're going to give you a demonstration. So if I set the scene a bit, this is a coaching session that's been going for some time, and we're going to join them just on contracting. Just lost the screen there. Just on contracting for that, they know that we're joining them, so don't worry about any confidentialities here or anything like that. We've got one person's in the spirit of global for this. We've got one person in Poland, the other one in Germany, and they're using a virtual world platform that enables the client to make visual representation of thoughts and feelings. I think we're already seeing it. So what you're seeing is the view from the coachee, so from the client. They're in this empty space, and they're used. The client is using the avatars to represent stakeholders or parts of himself. And the stakeholders are placed symbolically to represent the quality of the relationship or something that's going on. They're also using symbols there. So the fire, I don't know what that represents at the moment, but the fire will represent something for the client. The little eye that you can see above the avatar, you'll see when the client clicks on the eyes above avatars, we'll start viewing from that avatar. So we'll change perspective. So you may see perspective changing. I've just done that now. The other thing you might see appear, so look out for and listen out for, you might see some little heads appearing just behind the avatars. These are simulations of inner voices, that kind of what we say to ourselves. These are prompted by the coach listening carefully to the coachee. So when the coachee says, well, I should, or I ought to do this, or part of me does that, then the coach will encourage them to use an inner voice to represent it. Okay, so now you should all be able to see the inner world, see this virtual world. So what we're going to do now is listen in. So just keep quiet and let's hear what the coachee and let's hear how this coaching session's going.
Hello, Michael, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well, Klaus.
Okay, great. So I would like to understand more about what is challenging for you in this situation.
So the challenge is that my tendency is really to looking for the consensus in many situations and at work with team and with people. And recently it's hard for me to switch or to prioritize to some like different, or to stand for what's really important for me, to stay set up a priorities really, I think, or to set up a boundaries here. Because this kind of the private space for me and those who are nearby me, which are representing by this avatar here, yeah.
Michael, I would like to offer you a different perspective on it. Could you please go to roaming view? I already created a site for you. Do you see?
I can see it now.
Because how does it look like if you look on it from this perspective?
I feel like a little bit torn and not with the difficult to to decide or where to put my energy to, or that's how I'm feeling.
Okay. Okay, and as far as I see, you have you have chosen 3 different avatars to represent your situation. 4 different avatars, 3 without you to represent the situation around you.
That's right.
May I offer you to go in through the different positions and have a look on it from this different sides?
So let's start with others nearby me.
Okay.
I think it is right. So it's belonging to this private space and this little children which needs my attention now as well. It's in this area definitely. I think those are saying me. And what I'm noticing here as well is that Matt is able to see actually both, which is the blue avatar there, which is the team members, and myself as well.
Okay. Okay.
And others are just seeing me and Matt, which is interesting. And not that's really interesting.
Do you think it's challenging for them to be there where they are?
Oh, this is a good question. I think so, because it's a bit of the distance. I'm not even close to this private space here. I'm a little bit distant. It's maybe challenging.
It's challenging for whom? For the private.
It's yes. It is challenging for my private space. Yeah.
Okay. What would happen if you change something there in your distance for you?
I'm a really family man, and I think it's really important that being here. But at the same time, I'm it's the way I am presenting, like looking for the consensus here. It's something challenging here about this, because it's like I would really never be able to, you know, to find the right way with this kind of assumption. Looking it.
Do you think? Sorry.
Go
on.
It doesn't. This posture doesn't fit me here right now. It's
which one? The one of Michael?
The one for Michał.
Yeah.
The open being up for it. It's
okay. So maybe look for another one that fits more for it.
I would really like the. I think this is about right. No, I know. I feel. I think with this movement of this avatar, there is something about accepting and appreciating.
Michael, do you think? Do you think we're talking now about two different posters you had? Do you think these both avatars exist at the same time?
Yeah, they exist about the same time. I have a very. I think I'm less connected to this appreciating and applauding, approving avatar. I think it's something about, you know, accepting and appreciation in music.
Maybe it would help you if you represent both attitudes, both postures. It's a proposal from my side.
So I will bring another avatar here. Appreciating Michał. It is a small. I think it is a small.
And this appreciating Michał is appreciating to whom?
I think even to this situation.
To the situation.
The whole situation about both family and team. It's agreeing on, you know, there's. But I think that this one needs to have like more clear boundaries around him.
The appreciating one.
Appreciating one.
Yeah.
It will be bigger, and it will be able to grow when having.
Can you try? Can you try to visualize this? What you just said about the boundaries.
Let me look at the symbols. No, I don't think wolf, which kind of natural boundary, but it doesn't seem like it's a good one. I think the time. The clock slot.
Okay. Okay.
Present.
Okay, we'll stop the screen. I'll take the screen back. And we'll hold it there. well, a little vignette, a little bit of some coaching there. And what we noticed, the coach is kind of holding the space and listening to language, bringing curiosity and empathy, and encouraging new perspectives is something we saw there. And the coachee is doing labeling. This is something we, in this kind of world, we know that the labeling process, in other words, writing down or adding a color, a name, or posture, and what somebody says, that helps both tell the story. It helps reduce psychological distress. And there's some of Pennebaker's work in terms of feeling heard as well. There's lots of benefits to labeling in a world like this. There's some degree of immersion. So the soliplistic work that John Sula referred to is we become part of something, we become immersed in the story. We've got raised self-awareness happening with the coachee, and the new perspectives being taken, and a new meaning making. So we're working on a symbolic and metaphoric level when using a space like this. The other thing you might have noticed how slowly it goes. It's a very reflective space, and it does mean that for the coachee, they have an opportunity to slow down and reflect, and it's okay for it to be really quiet, so we don't have to keep filling the space. We work with some practitioners here, and this is a lovely example of trialogue. In actual fact, this is the coach and the coachee having some communication, but the coachee is engaged with their metaphor and what's going on in front of them. So those of you that might have worked with Small World or Sand Play or just drawings or buttons on a table will understand that process of working with a visual metaphor, encouraging that trialogue. Okay, so that was the fishbowl. So that world can also be used for teams. So in that particular world, it can take up to 10 people synchronously, and they don't need to be in the same place. They can be in their bedrooms, wherever, and participating in something where they can set out stakeholders and have a look at how the team relates to one another and to a project or task or various relationships in the organization. And what we notice now is some clients asking for this because they've got teams that are quite disparate and working globally, and they still have some sense of wanting to find out how they belong and how they connect with one another. So when we've got these good levels of disinhibition and getting to the difficult stuff, there is a symbol in this particular software that's an elephant that can be added, and for some cultures the elephant represents the elephant in the room. In other words, what's the thing we're not discussing, and quite often teams will add that and say, what is the elephant in the room? So the undiscussable becomes discussable. So we got a lot of the features that John Sula talked about so far as disinhibition, etc. is concerned, can start to play out in team building. Okay, so if we, Magda, I'm okay to start taking questions now. I think let's take some questions from the Q&A.
Yeah, there's a couple people who had raised their hand, but they disappeared. So if you guys could please raise your hand, I'll promote you to speakers. But I want to actually share a reaction that I had to this. I saw your demo before, and you know, commented that it's just something foreign to me. And just watching this session and how slowly it went and how thoughtful each movement was, it gave me a bit of an uneasy feeling because it's very confrontational, and I could see how you're really forced and challenged, I suppose, to think about how are you feeling, and even just, you know, the resizing of the avatar. I thought to myself, wow, like to compartmentalize your feelings to that degree, it's quite powerful.
Yeah, and this is why the contracting needs to be really clear and secure in a process like this, because there will be part of us that will feel like, well, I'm being drawn into being open. I'm being drawn into representing something that's going on in my mind and how I feel, and I'm going to be sharing that with someone else. So the anxiety might be somewhere around, oh, I'm not so sure that we've got a good contract here or something, or how can I be so open? I noticed there was a question earlier that came up on the chat around the asynchronous and synchronous ways of working. I think there's a place for both. And certainly in my experience, I've had several coachees who have wanted to work asynchronously and really enjoyed that. And for others who didn't enjoy it at all and found that they couldn't work asynchronously. They only wanted to have the sessions that we had booked synchronously. Some others enjoy doing a synchronous session and then a little bit of asynchronous follow-up to go on after that. So I'm not saying it's one or the other. I think it very much needs to be led by how the client prefers to engage and how they prefer to learn.
So have you found specific, I don't know, cultures or age groups that respond better, I suppose, or more openly to this type of coaching?
Yeah, probably not the age group that we've got in the room today. Certainly a younger age group have a preference and find it really easy to work with the virtual world and use avatars, and to work asynchronously and synchronously using text. And yeah, so there's quite a range. I think one thing I'm learning is that as the 20-year-olds and some of the early 30s now are saying, hey, how can we operate? Can we use WhatsApp? Mm-hmm. Can we use other ways in which I can feel mentored or coached or supported my learning process?
So it's actually a question from the audience. This assumes both coach and coachee are familiar with the usage of VR. In your experience, how long do the two parties need to come up to speed with VR?
Well, it's quite the coach gets trained to use the VR, and it's probably about the only time that they use it is during the training, because they're a client, so they get the experience of what it's like to be a client. But then when they do sessions with a client, it's always the client that uses the VR. It's always the client that drives the avatars around and takes the different views. The coach doesn't touch any of that. Because it's the client's world, and you'll find that if the coach then starts interfering, it's kind of ethically, I don't think that's quite right. So it's really important that the client feels like it's their world. If we find that if the coach just moves an avatar ever so slightly, the client has lost their ownership of that world, their sense of, oh, that was my world. How dare you? That's not right. So, and we find it's quick. The user interface for that particular bit of software has been, it's fairly easy to operate. It takes about 15 minutes after watching a short film. Okay.
So are there any other ethical considerations that you see with usage of this kind of technology, or just technology, role of technology in general with coaching?
Yeah, I think it's really important to know what you're doing with the technology. It's a little bit like this with Zoom. So know what you're doing and become familiar with it. And if you're going to use something like that virtual world, get yourself trained enough to be able to be competent and work within the scope of your practice, which I think is the same for any ethical considerations around coaching and mentoring. You might consider doing your supervision using the same process. So if you are starting to use a system like this for your coaching, do your supervision in the same way. And if you're using a virtual world for your coaching, use the virtual world for your supervision. So you're experiencing what it's like for your client. Use the technology with consent. Always just check with the client, is this okay? Are you all right to do this? Would you choose to do this? And always offer the client a choice and control and agency, so they feel like they have control over whatever system they're using. That's a really important part of this. That, in addition to all the data and the and security we talked about before. Any of those worlds, for example, that world we saw just now, the coach at the end of the session will say to the client, would you like to keep it? Would you like to go back to it later, or can it be deleted? And it's not deleted until the client decides to do that. So that's an important consideration around the ethics.
We have Deborah who would like to ask a question.
Hello, Deborah.
Hi, lying here on my bed.
You're in your pajamas in your bed.
Can you speak up, Deborah? It's hard to hear you.
Yes, I said in London, by the way, so I'm closer to David than maybe some of you are.
Okay. Yeah.
And the question I have is, it seems to me, just watching this brief demo, that someone asked what's the sort of downside to this, and it strikes me that, and I'm curious about this, it feels like it puts the client one step removed from themselves. So they're not necessarily really talking or feeling about themselves, which to me is the benefit of working, for instance, by phone, because it takes a lot of extraneous information out, like, you know, what is that person wearing? What are they looking like? What's their expression? What are, you know, and it lets people just really focus in on themselves. And it lets me as a coach really focus in on what I'm hearing and listen for that level 3 or even level 4 information. And it felt to me as I was watching this demo, like, gosh, there's so much fussy stuff that you're dealing with, color, and, you know, like, what does the avatar look like, and what are they doing, and what does that mean that they're doing this with their arms? I don't know. I just found it, to me, it took me away from the core conversation, and I'm curious what your response to that is.
Well, that's the dissociation that's experienced. So for some people, we have two parts to our business where this is used in therapy and counseling as well as in developmental work. And in therapy and counseling, the dissociation works really well, that some people can say, well, that's me that's over there, and I can talk about the me that's over there rather than being back in me that's over there, and we can work with both. There are ways in using the cameras in that particular software where we step back and we see ourselves, and then we can step into ourselves. So there's different ways of managing that, and we do encourage coaches to say, how are you feeling now, or what do you notice? And we do hear clients talk about a high degree of feeling part of what's going on. It's very hard in a small demo like that to see what that's like, but quite often people get very immersed and say, yeah, this is how it feels. I've got someone else.
Yeah, I've got a couple more questions that are,
okay.
I believe,
Michael.
Manya? There you go.
Yeah, I'd love to talk. I'm extremely excited. I was actually wanting to develop something like this myself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What's your background then?
Interactive theatre.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah. So exactly what you were saying, I completely understand, you know, the concern people might have that there's something in not being in oneself, but exactly the strength is that it raises awareness in that you can see yourself as an object at the same time that you're watching yourself. So there's that subjectivity, that observer capacity of raising your awareness and being able to integrate different aspects of yourself and become more aware of what's there. This really opens up the space for that. I'm incredibly excited. I mean, I just want to stay online with you afterwards.
Great. That'd be a pleasure. Yes, there's some projective identity going on as well. So we might experience it in puppetry, for example. Or when we see something going on in a film, we get quite moved by that, so we can see that. We have had people, well, I've certainly worked with people who put themselves in an avatar in a situation, and when they start moving, they get this visceral effect of, they can feel it. So we do get quite an emotional response, which is kind of useful also for future pacing. So we take people into a future scenario and say, how does this feel now? And you look back on yourself. So we also do time travel, so which is the lovely thing about something like this. I can travel into the future and look back at myself, or go into the past. I love doing time travel. Great. Michael.
Thank you for this. It's taking me down a path of, I'm a boomer too. And so the idea of looking at the coaching going from you know, pictures on tables to whiteboard to serious Lego play to clay building, and now to this virtual world, we see this evolution of integrating with this exterior locus of identity and where we are in the world as being very, very useful. I guess what I'm concerned about, and I'm curious about what feedback you've had from your participants is, have they again been able to transition effectively from extrinsic virtual modeling into intrinsic embodiment of that new awareness? Because it seems that there's extrinsic awareness, but is there intrinsic growth and development that, how do you shift that back so it's not always on the outside?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting listening to David earlier and about the role of mentor and about compassion. It's rather lovely when we see people integrating their own mentor for themselves. How do I bring that compassionate part of me into my life? We're really happy when people stop using the software, because one of the things we've noticed is that after 1 or 2 uses, the client doesn't need it anymore. In actual fact, they're starting to say, well, I notice a part of me does this, or it feels like I'm here. So the level of self-awareness goes up. So it's a, and I think that we've got 4 papers published about its use in the world of mental health. We don't have any particularly on this particular thing to do with internalizing the various components of understanding systems and metaphor, etc. But my belief, Michael, is that that's what's happening for some people, is they put a metaphor, an avatar there that's their compassionate self, and they start to become aware of it, and then that becomes internalized. And rather, it's not held on the screen, it's an internalized one. That's my belief. I have no evidence to say that, but having seen clients work with it and then they don't need it anymore, which is just wonderful, and then I can hear that it's internalized in the same way in which I rather hope they internalize some of my voice and mentor, or I'll encourage them to internalize other mentors or supporters or ways of learning for themselves.
Yes, great. Thank you.
I do see that as my role, how to encourage people to internalize their own learning capability.
Wonderful.
I think Ram has a question next.
Hey, Ram.
Yeah, hi, David. There was a question from someone on whether this is similar to perceptual positions that's used in neurolinguistic programming. Now, having used that, as well as in the Gestalt, there is empty chair, and more recently, there is this work on constellations by Whittington.
Yeah.
I have used them, and they are extraordinarily powerful. And some of the questions that Deborah, Michael, others had, if you use those kind of systems, you can really get into the mind of the client, and the client is able to emote extremely powerfully. There's something that happens when they put it up on a 3D space on top of tabletop, like Michael was saying, maybe a Lego set or whatever. I have found it to be extremely useful. Let me put it that way. And I worked with several coaches who have found it to be extremely useful. Now, this is another model which is on the virtual space. However, what I found was that perhaps there wasn't sufficient explanation beforehand. So at least I wasn't able to really understand the context. And perhaps if the context had been set, there would have been better understanding of what the demo was about. And there were also a couple of comments out here saying that the virtual reality platform wasn't really very sophisticated. How would you like to comment on that? They are on the chat box out here.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder what bit of sophistication it's missing. Because we had feedback earlier on today by someone saying it was incredibly sophisticated. So I find that a really interesting question. To what degree of is the additional degree of sophistication they think is missing?
There's someone, Money here, who said that as a technologist, I have used VR. Is this fishbowl? I found it very primitive and distracting. Is it because the technology is still evolving? And somebody else sort of.
All right. I think
Yeah.
Yeah, let's. I think where we're going to this with sophistication might refer to degree of reality. So some people that are used to seeing some gaming, or they might have seen people with headsets on, they expect a reality that's, well, I want to look at my office or my house, or they want to look at something that's real. This software has stayed away from that. So the primitive might be because they are blank androgynous avatars, and they're fairly it's a sparse space, and that's because the reality that we want to work with is the reality in the client's mind, not the reality on the screen. So when I was a young lad, I used to enjoy listening to radio plays, and those were the most real stories I could ever see because it was on radio. Like it was, the reality was created in my own mind. So the reason why it probably looks sparse and unsophisticated is probably because it's sophisticated, because it works with encouraging the client to put their own reality into avatars and situations. And that's really important, because if we try and make too much of the reality on the screen, then it's never going to be good enough. It's never going to be perfect. Oh, that's not my office, that's not my street, etc. So that might be some of the disappointment around the virtual reality, or I may have the wrong end of the stick.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's exactly what I feel too. Because even in constellation work and stuff like that, when you put it on the table,
yes,
I use coffee mugs, and I use pencils, I use erasers, and they create. It's about the inner this thing. It's not about the reality that you see.
So there's another example here would be I did some shadow work. I trained in shadow work, and when working shadow work, and you want someone to be someone in your life, let's say it's your boss, the question is, so when you think of your boss, what color comes to mind? You go, oh, well, yellow. And then they put a yellow cloth over their shoulder. Then from then onwards, they're your boss, because I've got that connection that enables that person to play my boss just because it's the yellow. So the rest of it's in my imagination. I have enough of a symbolic clue or cue to say that's my boss because it's someone that happens to be in yellow. So we're working with that degree of symbolism and metaphor. And I think it's so important that a high degree, at least 50% of the reality, is created in the client's mind, because then they own it, then it's true for them, and we're working with their mental model. Hopefully I've covered that one now. If not, please come back to me and let me know. What other
All right,
questions?
I'm just conscious of time, so if there's any last person who wants to raise their hand, now is your chance. Otherwise, we're going to wrap things up. There are a few questions, I think, that we've had in the chat, but I will collate those and send them to David, and if he wants to address any of them in a blog post, he's more than welcome to, and I will share that with everyone who's attended. But for now, we are out of time, so thank you so much, David. This was fascinating, as I expected it would be. Like I said, it left me with a bit of an uneasy feeling, but in a good way. I personally have been working remotely for quite a few years now, so I'm familiar with the person in the background walking around like this sometimes. And yeah, I feel very challenged by this approach, which I think is great, because how often do you get challenged these days?
Good.
So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's attended. For anyone who wants to earn their CCEUs, just a reminder, you'll get an email on May 15th with instructions on how to claim. And I hope to see you, all of you, and some of your friends, tomorrow. We get started again at 8 a.m. US Central Time. The schedule's on the website, and hope to see you then. Thanks very much, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, David.
Bye-bye.
And also, Magda, that anyone, if they want to know more about this, and if they contact you, we can always link them to David and ProReal.
Yes, I will post all the videos from the sessions on our website, and I'll email that to everyone. And in there, I will definitely link to David's company and the virtual reality world, so you can explore for yourself if you like.
Great. Thanks, Magda.
Thank you.
All the best now. Enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.